Hundreds of prisoners return home after Kyiv and Moscow agreed on the largest prisoner swap since the start of the Russian invasion.
As Italy prepares to head to the polls for its upcoming election, EU institutions are watching the vote closely, as the outcome could test the country's relationship with the bloc. Dabiz Munoz, a Madrid-based chef, has been crowned the best in the world, and his restaurant has also received the title as Best in Madrid.
Relief to be back on home soil. Hundreds of Ukrainian and Russian soldiers have returned after a nighttime prisoner exchange agreed by the warring countries. Those returning to Ukraine included the commanders of the battalion captured in Mariupol, who spent weeks fiercely defending the Azovstal steel plant from relentless Russian bombing. They were hailed as heroes and thanked for their service by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Also liberated, a group of foreign soldiers who had fought on the Ukrainian side. The American, British, Croatian, Moroccan, and Swedish nationals were flown to Saudi Arabia, which had negotiated their release. And in Russia, dozens of Russian soldiers and separatists from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions arrived overnight before being transferred to military hospitals for assessment. But while some are returning home, others in Russia are bracing themselves for battle. These reservists are among the 300,000 mobilized yesterday by Vladimir Putin's presidential decree. That order sparked a rare wave of protest across the country, with more than 1,000 people reportedly arrested in several cities. For now, the call-up is limited to reservists, but many fear it will be extended to the wider population.
Vladimir Putin's announcement of partial mobilization reflected many problems Russia is facing in its faltering invasion of Ukraine that Moscow is unlikely to be able to resolve in the coming months, says the Institute for the Study of War. It has been announced that only reservists who have completed their initial military service will be mobilized. Now, back in March, the Institute for the Study of War assessed that Russia has more than 2 million reservists, but only about 10% of them receive ongoing training after they complete their basic military service that lasts 1 year. It is unclear how much of the Russian reserve has already been deployed to fight in Ukraine. The UK Defence Ministry calls the newly announced mobilization, quote, an admission that Russia has exhausted its supply of willing volunteers to fight in Ukraine. Look at this map. Now, these are confirmed by the Institute for the Study of War Russian regions generating volunteer units to fight in Ukraine. Those regions in red, they generated multiple units. And those areas with the stripes here, these are the regions from where units or elements were deployed to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin noted that the front lines now stretch for more than 1,000 kilometers to explain why more Russian forces are needed. Russian forces, meanwhile, continuing their assaults and attacks of Bakhmut and against Avdiivka, whilst Ukrainian counteroffensive goes on in northeast of Ukraine, going towards Donbass, and also in the south of Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War says Russia's partial mobilization will thus not deprive Ukraine of the opportunity to liberate more of its occupied territory into and through this winter.
As Italians head to the polls for parliamentary elections this weekend, EU institutions in Brussels are watching closely to see what will happen in the bloc's third largest economy and what it will all mean for relations going forward between Brussels and Rome.
It's a big country with a big economy and with a big say in European politics. Therefore, whatever happens in Rome, whatever happens in Italy has a direct impact in Brussels, and the entire negotiation dynamics of all of the big EU policies depends on who is in power in Rome.
Some of those hoping to be in power in Rome: Enrico Letta from the Democratic Party, Giuseppe Conte from the Five Star Movement, and Silvio Berlusconi from Forza Italia. They've all already held this role in the past, while Matteo Salvini from the League and Giorgia Meloni of Brothers of Italy have not, the latter currently the rising star of the right coalition. Onlookers from Brussels speculate on what a Meloni win would mean for the European Union.
On economy, on migration, maybe they would try to break the consensus here in the EU, or at least to make compromises and decisions more difficult. And of course, if we look at the examples of Poland, Hungary, when the radical right or far right comes to the government, the rule of law and democracy are put into question, and it is a problem for the whole of the EU.
For their part, EU officials cannot make any comment on the record on internal domestic affairs taking place in Italy. But there does seem to be a feeling of discomfort in the European quarter of Brussels.
Indeed, in this particular case of Italy, I think that the bureaucracy and the Brussels bubble would have felt more comfortable with the previous sort of governance on the center left of the Italian political spectrum, something that they were used to deal with.
Whoever wins and whoever becomes Prime Minister will have to deal with Brussels and Europe. A government led by a right party would probably be more nationalistic and determined to rediscuss EU fiscal rules, whereas a left-wing government could offer views on EU policies, perhaps more consensual, with Brussels decision-maker circles. Maeve McMahon, Euronews, Brussels.
Fracking is now authorized in England. The UK's government has scrapped a moratorium on the controversial procedure, which extracts fossil fuels from deep beneath the ground by breaking up shale rocks. It's an effort to secure the country's energy supply, which has been severely disrupted since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The British government wants to counter skyrocketing energy costs by boosting local production. But fracking has long been opposed by environmental groups and communities for the damage it can cause. They say it can trigger earthquakes, contaminate water, and emit greenhouse gases, contributing to climate change. Those concerns were brushed off by Britain's Energy Secretary, who said they were based on hysteria, and that local communities would be consulted before new fracking sites are approved.
It's been another bad day for both the euro and the British pound, as further massive interest rate hike of 0.75% by the US Federal Reserve sent both currencies into a downward spiral. The pound fell to its lowest level against the dollar in 37 years, a second big slump in the space of 2 weeks. The euro fared no better, sinking to its lowest level in 20 years. Sterling has been consistently hit by surging inflation, a looming recession and concerns of economic policies announced by Prime Minister Liz Truss this week. The new PM announced tax cuts and increased public spending, as well as a relief package worth £100 billion to help people and businesses through the current energy crisis. That did not help the pound, which is also currently at its lowest level against the euro. UK Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng is expected to deliver his emergency mini-budget on Friday, providing long-awaited details on the government's plans to tackle the cost of living crisis. Elsewhere, the Swiss National Bank, one of the most trusted in the world, raised its key interest rate from minus 0.25 to plus 0.5%, the biggest hike in its long history, in an attempt to fend off mounting inflation.
For the first time in a century, Catholics are now the majority in Northern Ireland, according to a census released Thursday. Around 42% of the population identifies as Catholic, while only around 43% said that they were Protestant. In the last census in 2011, 45% of the population said they were Catholic and 48% said they were Protestant. Switzerland's central bank has issued its biggest hike ever to its key interest rates, joining other central banks from around the world that have done the same in an attempt to fight rising inflation. In August, the country recorded inflation at 3.5%, which is considerably lower than the rate of 9.1%, which hit the European countries that use the euro. Switzerland's bank says it didn't rule out raising interest rates again in the future. For the second year in a row, David Munoz, also known as Madrid's enfant terrible, has been crowned the best chef in the world. The 3-time Michelin star winner accepted the prize in front of several hundred chefs from around the world who had gathered in Spain's capital. And despite the prestige and international recognition, Munoz received the honor with humility.
I do not feel like the best chef in the world, far from it, but I do believe that I have the best team in the world.
Diver XO, one of his restaurants, was also awarded as the best in Madrid. The establishment, decorated with flying pigs, can cost as much as €365 per person. Munoz was not the only chef to be honored during the event. Another 99 chefs from around the world were also recognized.